Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today again. This is going to be a very interesting topic we've chosen today around the government and public works and government agencies. This actually has generated quite a bit of interest, more than we expected, so it's actually a very good thing. We had a previous guest, Narges from San Francisco, was with us a few weeks ago. And there was a lot of questions around government work, government agencies, and we decided to have a special topic around this. So quite a few things to discuss, so let's get going. So again, as always, thank you to our sponsors. So Slalom has been sponsoring us for a couple of years now, as well as Precocity, who is our official Zoom sponsor in this pandemic time we're living. This is August 11th. This is Service Design Dallas from the Service Design Network. So I'm Greg Lacloupe from Slalom, and we have Brandon, Christopher, and Brenda from Precocity, Capital One, and GM Financial. Everybody says hi. Very nice. As always, I want to let you know that this is recorded. So if you are not able to watch the entire session, or if you have people in your team who actually want to watch it, they cannot watch it, you can watch it probably tonight, later this evening. You can also watch our past, I believe we have a dozen sessions now on our YouTube channel. So just look for the Service Design Network Untitled Chapter channel, and you can see all our past sessions. And you will see today's probably this evening. Today's agenda, we're going to be talking about our guests and our coming events. We're going to talk about the open Q&A rules, because this is an open Q&A panel that is for you guys. Today's topic is going to be service design for government and public works. As a reminder, we have only 1 hour. We try to be respectful of our guests' time. We usually run a bit long, so we'll try to be as quick as possible. So let's kick started. So if you usually go and ask anyone what industries are currently in most need of customer experience help, you usually get the same 4 or 5 answers, right? It's healthcare, financial services, government. Not necessarily those 5 or those 4, not in that order, but most likely government comes up as a really dire problem space where customer experience is just really not what it is in the private sector. So what is that? So what do people usually think about the government experiences? So again, if you go around and you ask, family members or friends, they say, hey, tell me about your last experience with a government space. A few things come to mind. The DMV usually comes to mind as a wonderful experience that we have all go through. I just went through this not long ago for one of my daughter's driver lessons, and it was dreadful. It was really, really just, I can't think of anything good about it. Social security, unemployment offices, all the same kind of government entities are just not great experiences, right? Another one, like from all the way down from the local government, like you're trying to pay for your water bill or fund your trash day, to renew your driver license, to healthcare.gov, which is a very fabled, website failure. We don't really have a really great user experience compared to some really awesome experience in other private companies, for example. So not a great experience on that level. And there's a really, 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 really bad ones. Like, for example, if you remember a couple of years ago, there was the really bad experience in Hawaii. The missile system sent an automated message to all the people living in Hawaii, telling them to seek shelter because it was an inbound ballistic missile. This was really bad. And of course, once the dust settled, the metaphorical dust settled, thankfully, people started to point fingers like whoever did this should get fired, whoever's boss should get fired, and why the governor of Hawaii should get fired. But people like us who are in this space start to question like, this is strange, right? This should not happen. Why is this happening? Why is a government employee sitting in Honolulu in some building somehow decide to send this automated message to thousands of people? So we kind of looked into it, and we found out that this was the actual interface that this employee had to deal with every day. And you can see that there is some really basic Amber Alert system, and there is some GRISM tests and some weather alerts links. And in the middle of all this, you actually have 2 nuclear alerts. And you can see where easily somebody who's maybe not paying attention, not really well trained, instead of clicking on a test message, can click on the nuclear alert. And this is what happened. So this was obviously a poor UX UI design, and we have to be better than that as designers, whether we design for private sector or public sector. Someone should not be having to deal with this and have some extraordinary repercussions. The good thing is that it doesn't have to be bad. For example, I will use the example of the Dubai. I've experienced it myself, and Dubai is very often being highlighted as a wonderful experience for the citizens. So citizens of Dubai have a wonderful experience. They can pretty much do everything online. They can pay their bills online. They can do just about everything online. It's a really, really good experience in terms of citizenship. All the way down to like paying your parking ticket. So they have a mobile app, and they can actually just log in, and they can pay their fees, they can pay their impound fee, they can do a whole bunch of stuff on the app. And I didn't put it as like a really delightful experience because, obviously you're still paying a parking fee, so it's not great, but it's not bad. So it can be done in a good way. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. We have to be aware that there are thousands of great designers working very hard on great design initiatives for public works all over the world, right? And this is what we're going to be talking about today. So today, we are very lucky to have Aza Damood from Fannie Mae in DC. We have Narges from the city of San Francisco. We have Brian Blank, who is working Dallas, who has an extensive experience in Department of Defense projects, for example. Super quick, it was our intent today to actually have 3 members of 18F, which is an innovation studio within the government. If you're not familiar, just look them up. It's a wonderful group of people who are basically a design consultancy within GSA, which is the government services. They weren't able to join us today because we had to clear them from being able to discuss their current projects. But they will be here in a later date, and they will tell us how it is to design, do human-centered design, design thinking, service design within the government. So their clients are, DOD, DEA, Department of Justice, and they do a wonderful work within the government to make the government better. Let's keep that in mind for the next, stay tuned for next time. Super quick note, a lot of the work that are being done in government are obviously highly sensitive. I was joking with Brian earlier before this, and Brian has worked extensively for government projects, Department of Defense, for example. So if you have a very pointed question about something, our guest may not be able to answer your question. That's totally okay with us. So just be aware of that. If it's something very sensitive in nature, they have the liberty to not answer your question. We'll work around that. So keep that in mind. So without further ado, let's just get going. So we're going to keep this very informal. We're going to have a very good conversation with our 3 guests today. Very quickly, I just want to introduce yourself. So a couple of minutes. So we have Aza Damood from Fannie Mae in Washington, D.C., Narges from San Francisco, and Brian Blank from Slalom. So just go ahead and introduce yourself. Aza, do you want to start?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Excited to be a part of the conversation. I love the intro that you had. I am currently a director of customer experience design with Fannie Mae. We have a team of about 80 designers total. My team is about 30 people. I have a mix of design strategists, service designers, and UX designers. And a large part of what my team works on is the affordable mission, which is part of why Fannie Mae was stood up as a government-sponsored enterprise. We're not considered a government organization, but the government stood us up and regulates us, especially after going into conservatorship after the housing crisis. And a part of our mission is to make housing affordable and access to housing for all people at all times. And also a part of our enterprise innovation team, our designers partner with them to try to think about going out of conservatorship and becoming a private entity. So I'll stop there.
Very good. Iran, do you want to go next?
Sure. Iran Narges. I work for the city and county of San Francisco. It is both a city and a county. This is my first public sector job. I took it early in 2019. I was recruited for a specific role, which was at the time to be the service designer for the Permit Center, which was a place that was being built. So it's a physical place in a new building, and also designing the experience of permitting. And there are many, many different kinds of permitting services that you might access in this place. So it was sort of a big, sprawling, ill-defined job, but I loved that it had so much to do with physical and in-person experiences, along with, of course, the inevitable technology components. And one of the things that was interesting for me was that I would organizationally be part of San Francisco Digital Services. So our team, Digital Services, is I think just under 40 people now. We've been working on the website as one of our core sort of platform things over the last few years, and really re-envisioning it as a platform for delivering services. We have a team that's dedicated to affordable housing. So there's an agency in the city that provides affordable housing services. And we have a team dedicated to the cannabis equity program. And then we have another team that's really working on the digital transformation of building permits, which is something that started in very serious earnest with, we started a pilot pre-pandemic that was like a little bite of this world. And then when the pandemic hit, it really reordered our priorities, and it changed my job very much. So I went from focusing on this in-person experience and the connection to all these different organizational components to kind of pivoting to being more technology focused now. It is hard, but it is interesting, and I'll stop there and leave.
Very good.
Later.
Thank you so much. Brian, do you want to finish this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the time today. I really appreciate it. My name is Brian Blank. I am with the Strategy and Operations Group with a consulting firm called Slalom LLC. Slalom's a modern consulting firm focused on strategy, technology, business transformation. We operate in a number of offices across the US, Canada, the UK. We have a few thousand clients, public sector, state and local, and federal is part of our client base that we do serve. Prior to that, I spent quite a number of years up in the DC area. I was working for a Fortune 100 IT management consulting firm, and I was providing consulting services to federal agencies. In particular, my main client was the Department of Defense, focused in headquarters, U.S. Army, Department of Navy, a little bit of Homeland Security as well. Ran a number of engagements for those clients during that time, program management, process improvement, IT implementation, strategy development, audit and internal control, cybersecurity, scopes of work of that nature. Look forward to the discussion today and participating, helping out wherever I can.
Thank you so much, Brian. Let's see. So as a quick reminder, if you want to have any question addressed to our panel or individual speakers, go in the chat. The chat is very engaged, and we love that about you guys. But sometimes your question can get lost in the noise. So please make sure to make it easy for Brandon, Christopher, and Brenda to kind of like make sure that we know there's a question for them. Please do not wait the last 5 minutes of the session to ask your question. So feel free to ask anytime. We are going to collect them, aggregate them, curate them, and then we're going to ask them those questions when we have time at the end. But don't wait the last minute to ask those questions. Just make sure, make it obvious that it's a question to our guest, please. Thank you so much. So we're going to start having some very high-level questions for our panelists. The first one is, designers want to make the world a better place. Is government work the best place to be truly impactful? We're going to be going around this topic quite a bit, this comparison between public, private, government, corporate. There's a lot of comparison being it is better or worse. So we're going to try to, so who wants to answer this question first? Who wants to go first? Aza, you want to start?
Not fair. I always go first because my name begins with A. No, just kidding. It's a great question. I don't know that I have an answer to it. I mean, I'll be quite honest. It was interesting for me. I began my career in architecture, and then I did a lot of consulting, like in the UI UX world. That's where my career started at IBM. And I always, like Iran said, was out looking for opportunities to bring like experience design in the physical space into the mix of the work that I was doing, because I had an architecture background. And, my hopes and my desires were mostly aligned with, creating amazing experiences. I had done like art installations and worked for an artist for a long time. Did work with Marriott's innovation team for a while. And it wasn't until like the last 5 years when I moved back from Toronto to DC that I really got involved when I was in government consulting with like the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Veterans Affairs. And it's the first time in my career where I saw a social impact to the work that I was doing. It just wasn't a part of the equation when I was working for Air Canada or telecom companies or banks. This has not been something that in my career I had kind of looked for. I just kind of dropped on my lap and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like so important, to think about all the services that, all of the social kind of programs go through the Department of Health and Human Services, and every service for the veterans goes through the VA. I've been very, very, kind of moved to see the influx of designers coming into DC that have studied design as a way to gain social impact. And because I run the service design community within DC, which we started about 4 years ago, it's a constant topic of conversation, whether or not it's really the best place to be truly impactful, is a tough question to answer. But I do have to say, the younger generation and also all the programs that we see out of universities and schools that really enable this line of thinking can only lead to good things, right? So I'm really, really hopeful to see that. And I do think there's a lot of impact that you can obviously make, but it's just very difficult, hard work to actually get things across the finish line and get it to actually be done.
Yeah. So I guess maybe Erin can chime in on this, because like it's obviously there's a lot of really good work being done, but also a lot of frustration. We as designers we talk about this. It's like there is so much to be done. We'll talk about it later, but it's kind of like it's wonderful to work for the government or do something that's really impactful for society as a whole, but it's also so much frustration, right? So what is your experience?
Well, it's interesting that you say the word frustration. When you were talking about what the customer experience of government is, the first word that popped into my head is frustration. And there's this reality that if you're trying to access a government service, they probably have a monopoly on that thing that you need. So as someone who came from an entire career in the private sector, that's a really interesting condition of this work. I think that this question of impact, I think if you're really looking for where you can make the most impact, it's not just sort of government versus private sector versus a nonprofit that's non-governmental. It's really sizing up the specific opportunity and trying to assess everything about that opportunity to see, like, do we think that the pieces are more or less lining up with sort of some momentum behind this, some sort of executive supports. Maybe there's a groundswell in the community around the thing. When I was assessing this job, I was very much looking to have impact, and I was looking at different factors around the role, see like, is this thing going to be real in the world? And so depending on the job, maybe that particular government job isn't the place for impact. Maybe there is a nonprofit organization that has deep roots in the community and has community partnership lined up and has some private sector sponsors. And that could be an amazing opportunity to make something real. For me, that's my assessment now of things that I want to spend my time on is like, do I think I can get this thing to live?
Very good. Brian, do you have an opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting. I think it's an interesting question. My time up in DC running some large programs, it was the very old school, large, multi-year, tens of millions of dollars of budget dollars. long implementation, very rigid waterfall type of engagements. As I was transitioning from DC to Dallas, I was seeing more opportunities, more instances where service design, human-centered design thinking were coming into some of the activities at the agencies. We had talked about 18F. What I wanted to do for this call was prepare and just learn over the last few years some of the other entities and initiatives that the government has been standing up. And they've got some really cool organizations out there that are in this vein. We talk about 18F. There's the U.S. Digital Services that was founded in 2014. 18F was founded in 2014 or stood up in that time frame. There's the Presidential Innovation Fellowship Program, which was stood up in 2012. If you look at you can go and read the 2018 Presidential Management Agenda, which is an IT modernization roadmap, if you will. And what's neat in there is in the 2018 version of that report, they talk about user-focused design quite a few times. And they talk about allocating some funding for some IT optimization centers of excellence. These are organizations that exist in the government today. The 18F, USDS, the fellowship program. And if you go to all their websites and look at the projects that they're working on or look at their mission statements, they all kind of say the same thing. They're talking about using and harnessing technology and innovation strategies to better the world. They talk about the teams and the people that they have with them, designers, product managers, engineers, artists. They talk about, all the things and the tools that they utilize in their engagements, right? Agile, lean, design thinking, data-driven research, things of that nature. So the amount of content that I was able to research and find just over the last few days, it was real refreshing to see. Then you take a look at some of the projects and the headlines and the things that they're working on. And when you talk about making an impact, right? So I just jotted a few of them down to help me out here today. But, you've got the 18F, transforming how the Department of Justice Civil Rights Divisions engages with the public, right? So they talk about a case study where typically they have over 100,000 pieces of mail that come into their organization on a yearly basis, and they have to answer that through a manual process. 18F paired with the Department of Justice to streamline that process, make it stand up a website where their users could come in and engage with the DOJ in a much more efficient process. You look at the USCS organization, right? They talk about a successful project that they had with HHS for a Medicare payment system modernization. And they say, hey, there are 57 million Americans on Medicare and Medicare payments schedules. By the way, that system that runs those processes is 40 years old, and it runs on what they say 16 million lines of COBOL. So the USDS has stepped in to help them modernize the processing of Medicare payments. So when you talk about ability to truly be impactful, those are some of the things that I think about as a point as well to answer this question. I think some of the organizations and the agencies and the projects that they're taking really do have a very far reach and are going to be very impactful for millions of Americans.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. That's a very good answer. Let's follow through with this next question. How much work is there to do? Seriously. So, Aaron, let's use your personal experience, the city of San Francisco, right? You've been there for over a year and you've done some stuff. How much more is there to do when you kind of look at, I'm assuming, the amount of stuff to be done there?
It's infinite.
Next answer.
It's hard to how do you define done? I mean, one of the realities of San Francisco is that the government is very, siloed. There are a lot of different organizations. And so this organizational fragmentation is another part of the reality of working in the city and county. And so it can make it hard to do overarching goal settings. Also, as a civic body, like the voters have a tremendous amount of say in what our budget looks like and what the priorities are. And the voters change the government by changing elected officials. And so having that kind of clear, focused North Star vision is incredibly challenging. And so in government, you're always sort of focusing on a problem within that. And I don't think we're ever going to run out of problems.
Okay. So, but you see where, for example, we work on some private companies who have a very finite, problem space, right? And you end up yourself, you find yourself just iterating and iterating and iterating to the point like this has to be perfect. And eventually you can get to a place where like this is good enough, right? But when I can switch to Aza, for example, it's kind of like there is Fannie Mae and then I'm sure you have some colleagues and peers in other areas and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you guys are still doing this, right? So what is your experience about kind of like how much work that we can contribute to as designers to government?
Well, so first thing, I just, it's making me realize the level of Zoom here. There's federal government, which is the Washington, D.C. type of government. There's the state government, there's city, there's county, there's other local governments. So that whole stack is, one thing. The thing with, one of the most kind of valuable pieces of advice that I received when I switched from going from consulting to working in-house at Fannie Mae was, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Because I was used to, there's a finite even project, this is our timeline. We're going to do the best that we can. It's going to be done, or things are going to be shipped. And I just find at Fannie Mae, it's, we started, our customer experience design team started working with our digital products teams on the software and digital products that Fannie Mae has for other financial institutions. So banks are really our customers. We're a B2B, not a B2C. But as design has gotten a hold and design thinking and the human-centered design mindset is something that the enterprise is starting to realize and really is thirsty for as a way to do creative problem solving for all parts of the business. So a part of my team runs, we use the Luma system of innovation and we run trainings and kind of spread this mindset to everyone. And there's like legal and the risk department and they're all coming to us like, they really like this way of thinking. They really like putting their other humans, I don't like to say the word users, other humans at the other end of the problem, really understanding what the opportunities are, what the pain points are, and then working in a creative way to kind of diverge their thinking and explore all the possibilities before then coming to a solution. Like this whole process is something that can be applied to like all the nooks and crannies of a huge organization. So the work itself is, there's the work itself in terms of the impact that it's going to have on affordable housing, on the experience of our customers using our digital products. But then there's also transforming a kind of cultural transformation within government and organizations and companies themselves to become more agile, to not be as bureaucratic or working in waterfall methods. So there's a lot to do.
It sounds like it. So, Brian, if it's okay, unless you actually want to talk about this, I want to skip the next question because we're already getting to half of the other thing. Is that okay with you?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Brian, what makes designing for government agencies different and more challenging than for private companies?
Quite a few things. Iran had mentioned when she was answering the last question, silos. Silos exist in all levels of the government agencies, state, local, at the federal level as well. I'd say as well, there's a lot of regulations and regulatory burdens that you have to navigate through when dealing with government agencies that you may not have at private companies. I'd say sometimes your decision makers don't have full authority, so the decision-making process may be very bureaucratic. So that may elongate some of your timelines. You're going to have that commonly in government agencies. I'd say from a culture perspective, so I had referenced quite a few awesome examples, earlier, but that's not the norm. That's still not the norm. That's the to be state. The as is from a cultural perspective, it's still very much a hierarchy in a lot of the government agencies. So you need to go through appropriate channels before some things can actually be progressed. And then you're really looking at, outdated or maybe antiquated technologies or processes or capabilities. That's something that you're going to run into quite a bit in government agencies, just for, no lack of good faith or good intentions. It's just the environment in which they operate in and that you have to engage and deal with.
And I guess, Aaron, if you don't mind, we just discussed this before this call, and you were talking about having like technical debt, right, or technology debt. I'm guessing you agree with what Brian just said. Do you want to tell us more?
Very much so. I mean, you're almost never in a greenfield environment where you can just stand up a service from scratch with the latest SaaS things. There are these giant gnarly systems that have to be dealt with, and it's the companies that create these systems and contract with government. That's a very specific niche, and just the environment around contracting, right? So there's this thing called procurement, which is a big fancy word for buying stuff in government, and just that process alone is so challenging that there's sort of an ecosystem of companies that really specialize in getting in there and learning how to do it. And, I touched on this before, but, it's a monopoly environment. It's also an environment where, there tends to be a perception of scarcity, and a reality of scarcity many times. It's different in private. I'd say the systems and the organizational structures are the two most challenging aspects for me. But to Brandon's comment in the chat, which I just saw, there are some things that can be easier. People they're not used to having nice things, and so they're so easily delighted by what design can bring, and they're so incredibly uncritical of what design can bring at times. Like they're not used to having nice things. And when you show them something that's even halfway decent, it's like the joy is unbelievable.
Bar's pretty low, I guess. So, Aza, do you want to comment on this? I'm with the next question.
Quickly. I would say,
sure.
It's the scale, and the complexity, especially in federal government. It's just ginormous systems and complexity of processes and departments and stakeholders. And, all of that makes it that much more challenging to get anything done. And to the point of some things that are easier, the delight of people to see something usable, but also the delight of just using service design tools for communication and getting everybody on the same page. It's so helpful just to be able to map out a process and share it with all the 100 people that actually touch it and have them all understand visually what's going on, or to be able to communicate the vision of where we want to go. That stuff maybe is not as impactful other places, but it becomes extremely impactful in this kind of environment.
Very good. Let's go to the next question. How has designing for government agencies changed in the past few years? Are things getting better? Aza, you want to keep going?
I better in terms of there are more designers. There are all sorts of initiatives, like the customer experience has become a term that's now, it started with the Veterans Experience Office being stood up and having a chief experience officer, and now it's become something that is being kind of propagated throughout other organizations. They're becoming customer centric. They're starting to realize that yes, we actually do have customers. Like maybe they're not paying customers, maybe we don't have to get them to download the latest app for, to get money, but we are servicing other human beings. And that whole mindset, I would say, in the last 5 years since I've been here has been amazing to see. There's definitely a long way to go. But, given the environment today with COVID and with all the, anti-racism and equity issues and movement, there's the question of what is better. I mean, there's still a long way to go, I would say, for us.
So, Brian, you've actually been doing government work for 15 years, so you definitely have seen an evolution. So tell us, how has it been evolving from your point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say it's definitely evolved just because it's now part of the ecosystem where when I started out in my career, I can't say that it was very widespread. I'm not saying it's widespread now, but it has made a lot of progress. I'd say in the past 5 to 7 years. I'd say overall things are getting better just because some of the terms being used, the processes being used. I looked at it from, hey, can you get a job around user experience in the government? So this morning I went on fedjobs.gov. And I just searched for a few keywords. I searched for user experience. I searched for UX engineer, things like that. I got a few returns. So like the IRS, they were hiring for user experience designer. U.S. Postal Service was hiring for U.S. experience manager. CMS was also had a job rec. And then I looked at some of the large integrators like the Accentures, the Lockheeds, the IBMs of the world. And sure enough, Accenture had a UX engineer in their federal division that they just posted a job rec for yesterday. So I'd say at least from an interest and a demand perspective, I think it is getting better. From an initiative and engagement perspective, just from the rollout that we've seen over the last few years, yeah, I'd say it's definitely getting better.
So, Iran, I'm actually going to ask you the next question, which is a twofold, right? It's like, what do you foresee designing for public work becoming 5 years from now? Is it going to be same as today, or do you see it be more in the private sector, assuming private sector is better?
When you ask me that, I think about money and budgets, and I think about COVID and what has happened to our economy. I hate to bum everybody out, but it's interesting because in some, our government in the city and county is certainly doing better than a lot of our small businesses, and among other things, the government that I work for certainly understands its role in being an employer and therefore creating a certain amount of economic stimulus in the region. So they have explicitly adopted a strategy of trying to avoid layoffs as much as they possibly can. But I think just the economic reality is going to have a lot to do with where the investments go. And so, my department is in demand right now because we are helping stand up all of these services that people can access without having to go and interact in person. And as long as we continue to deliver that kind of value and stand up these things quickly, like we'll probably be a healthy part of our local government. But how will that affect the presence of design in other agencies where it's not well established and is considered to be a luxury? And we'll see.
Aza, how do you see your job and your team evolving the next couple of years or 5 years from now?
Specifically, my role in Fannie Mae, I mean, we are preparing to be a full private company and come out of conservatorship. So there's a lot of investment on having us think that way, and being able to think about, what other business models we can have, aside from being the strict regulated entity that we are right now. So, really good things for myself personally, and a lot of exciting opportunities for the team. I think from a larger kind of, I did do government consulting for, most of my career in the 15 plus years that I was a consultant. So looking at that, I think that it's going to continue to evolve, and I think the digital transformation and ability for people to do things digitally is just going to continue. So, we mentioned COBOL code. They have to start somewhere, right? They have to get rid of the COBOL. They have to bring up the languages. People are not going to see the effects of that immediately. But as that kind of modernization continues to bubble and bubble and bubble, eventually there'll be more and more usable services and things more streamlined. So I'm hopeful.
Good. I'm going to switch to the next question. We have about 15 minutes left. I'd like to move as many questions. We can actually ask people to ask your question, okay? Brian, let's start with this. Are design methodology and tools different in private and public sectors? For example, design research, having access to stakeholders, the stuff that we take for granted in the private sectors that is, design research 101. How does that work in the government space? And that's just one example.
Yeah, this is a bit of a tough question for me. I would want to say the methodologies are the same. We may not have access to all the types of tools, depending if we're within a federal agency network. We may not have access to all of the at least IT tools that we may want to use. Methodologies would still be there. So yeah.
So maybe let's ask the designers maybe. So as an Aaron, what do you feel about design research as an example, or it could be prototyping, for example?
For my team, the methodologies should look very familiar. The approaches are scrappier. We don't have the budgets for recruitment and all the other services that I had access to doing this in the private sector. We also have some really interesting constraints around research, because the way that this sort of direct interaction of citizens with the government has people think about that very differently. So we can't be these sort of objective researchers. We are at all times the government interacting with people. And so there's issues around any kind of perceived favoritism. For example, in user research, if we're prototyping something that hasn't launched yet, are we giving is there going to be a perception that we're giving insider access to someone that we're testing with? So that's not something I've had to deal with in the private sector before. We also have, we have goals around equity, and, really making sure that we're accessing as many different kinds of communities as possible. That I certainly didn't hear that conversation as much in the private sector.
Aza, you want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, I would say it's different. It's not necessarily about the tools, but the scope and constraints, right? So, from a legal perspective at Fannie Mae, it's very difficult. We're just not allowed. Our regulator does not allow us to talk to citizens and borrowers and regular families. So we often go through vendors or other consulting companies that we procure and pay for. So that, they can become an intermediary. And as Iran said, you are always the government or the company that you're representing talking to these people, and they could be jaded, with thinking about what they think of Fannie Mae and the housing crisis. So, sometimes we want to be anonymous. in what we're looking for. So I would just say it's a lot more constrained and has a lot more legal implications.
Okay. I think I have one more question. We can kick in the attendees' questions. Okay. Just very quickly, all of you, can you give us an example of one very successful or rewarding project that you were very proud of being part of? Brian, you want to start this one?
Yeah, I can give some high-level details. So I was in charge of standing up on a very quick, agile basis a asset tracking IT platform for headquarters U.S. Army. So what was nice was that our client stakeholder was open to my group, my organization coming in and replacing a sunsetting piece of technology. But we proposed that we could do it in 3 months' time and for, a fraction of the cost of the legacy system. My stakeholder was all about it. She really was a champion of the effort. We were using a very lean pod. We came in and did our design, build, and implementation over 90 days. What was nice was the sunsetting piece of technology was at the next level up. It was at the Department of Defense. And we had to report out to them that we could do it because they didn't believe it. They had spent tens of millions of dollars and a number of years standing up the legacy system, whereas my firm came in and said, we can rip and replace that system in 90 days. They didn't believe it. They said, okay, in 90 days time, you're going to come and give us a demonstration of the full functionality and capabilities. It needs to be hosted in a federal data center and has to adhere to all the IT security requirements. And we did it. It really was a successful project. It got a lot of kudos for my client at the Army because they really went to bat for us and this. Is just a different type of methodology for an IT implementation. And, we put in the hours, we got it done. But that was really the first engagement where I moved away from those very, elongated, drawn out IT implementations that take months and months and months and years and years and years. And it proved to at least that customer base that, hey, the art of the possible here can be done, right? The technology does exist. The capabilities and the skills do exist. We can navigate the environment successfully, and we could, give you a capability, a solution in a fraction of the time for a fraction of the cost that the Department of Defense had been paying for previously.
Very good story. Iran, do you have one?
Sure. This is just a small thing, but my team helped stand up a COVID testing site in San Francisco, and there was the testing partner, Color. They private sector company. They had already done a lot of work in thinking through the service. We were working with a number of different agencies. The port supplied the land and some people. We were working with the Department of Public Health and the Department of Human Resources. And the digital services team created the front end application for people to go in and make an appointment and answer questions. And I think we were able to stand that up in 2 weeks or less. My role as service designer was pretty minimal, actually. But what I did do was, with all of the different entities and departments and partners, I created the service blueprint that tied everything together and sort of kept track of all the little pieces and all the little interactions, and also the movement of data, which was important for HIPAA, so that we could ensure that we weren't sending. That we weren't breaching HIPAA anywhere along that whole path. And so I was proud to be a part of that.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you for doing that. Aza.
Yeah, it's hard for me to have my hand in anything these days, just given the large team that I have. So it's their work, not necessarily mine. But I think one of the most rewarding things is working with our affordable housing team. And one of the things that we did very early on when I joined about 2 years ago was to really do an extensive study on low-income borrowers and understanding the challenges that they have. And we have a loan product that was supposed to be targeting the low income people, but through our studies and uncovering all of the opportunities, we realized that there's a lot of challenges that they go through that is not currently being addressed, and the product that we have is actually moderate income people using it, not low income people. So can't get into the details of the policies and all of that extensively, but it's been very rewarding working with that team to try to really change our policies in terms of what these people need and how to better serve them.
That's great. If you guys are okay on time, I know we're just a bit long, which was expected. If you're okay on time, we're going to start getting some questions. Brendan, do you want to start with the first question?
Absolutely. So our first question comes from Carolina Byerts. Hi, Carolina. She says or asks, for those who work in the public sector, do you have any tips on how to present qualitative findings, like from user testing, interviews, observations, et cetera, to senior stakeholders, like a change program director, who have not yet been exposed or don't believe in service design? Like, how do we get them to take it seriously? Taking into consideration for Carolina, it's a social enterprise nonprofit. They have a website and stuff, but her challenge basically seems to be that this group, like to what you mentioned, Iran, they're not used to getting this kind of data. They're not used to seeing it. Maybe they're not used to trusting it. So how does Carolina get those stakeholders in this type of an org to buy into the data, whereas maybe in the private sector, it's just a given? This is for the whole panel, by the way, all of you.
I'll just say that my experience in the city has been, and yeah, go ahead, stereotype San Francisco, bleeding heart liberals all you want. It's true. People care about these individual stories, and so when you go and get those direct personal stories and the quotes, that is something that I've found to be very impactful.
Totally on that. Yeah. I think telling stories, especially with qualitative data, that's really important, is to be able to tell personal stories and also maybe do some work for them. I think one of the things that I've come to realize, switching from consulting to in-house, is that in consulting, people would hire the companies and they kind of were asking for this kind of work, whereas in-house, these people may not be familiar with it. So how can you go a step further and really translate the insights that you found to what it means for their business, and give them a little bit more of the so what and how they should interpret it? I feel like that always comes a long way.
Do we have another question?
We do. We've got a great follow-up question, actually, to that. If I can get my Slack to come back up, from Ariel Steinberg. And this is, sort of the flip side of that. You've got we were just talking about the audience that's receiving this information. Ariel's question is centered more around the barriers that are in place in government work to allow you access to do the kind of research that we really like to do in design. So, noting the barriers for the successful human-centered design work, such as the PRA, Ariel mentioned, the Paper Reduction Act, it can actually slow down the approval time to get surveys sent out to large groups of people. So the question for the panel here is, how have some of you gotten around some of those probably very appropriate barriers for consumer privacy or other cost reduction purposes, getting access to large groups of customers or people to get feedback? Anybody got any answers there?
Ryan, maybe?
Unfortunately, no. I never had to pull those types of data sets during my time with the government.
We did surveys actually as a part of the Veterans Experience Office. Like we had a whole measurement office set up for that, but I think that was a unique environment because we had a Veterans Experience Office. And also at my work at HHS, we came across those barriers. I think that a part of it is, surveys require personal information like emails, whereas doing kind of rogue interviews does not. I remember when I was at the IRS, I won't name any names of what company or what projects, but like we did intercept interviews, like people off the freaking street. You have to find partners who are willing to, who believe in the work and are willing to allow you to do it. But they are out there, and it's not always bureaucracy. I mean, when it comes to personal information, yes, there is, but you can do intercept surveys and you can do other qualitative research, or you can hire other people to do it, which is also a way to get around it.
It was a loop.
Yeah, sorry. So we work with a nonprofit actually, but we do contract with them. They help us with our recruiting, and that the city attorney is happy with this arrangement. So we work with them, and we work with community-based organizations in whatever segment we're trying to target.
One more question, maybe Brandon?
Yeah, we actually have a nice one here, and I'm interested to hear the answer as well. It should be an easy one for everybody, so we'll shoot off maybe with you, Eran. So the question is from Helena Blake-Moore. She asks, what do you use for mapping your processes, especially if you have to do it virtually?
So this is back to the question about what's different, private versus public. I very often use Google, like a Google Sheet, and kind of stay at that fidelity. Now that we're working remote, sometimes I use Google Slides as sort of the next step up. I absolutely hate it as a design tool, but it's, it gets the job done, and it's, given all the other priorities we have, it's often the appropriate level of investment. I haven't found a more, we've looked at some other kinds of tools, and we haven't found anything more automated or more smart that really, that's worth the effort. So
like things like Miro, Mural that we use is not necessarily worth investment.
I'm trying to get digital services to pay for one of those tools, but that hasn't happened yet. Just the barrier to entry is so low with Google, like with the Google Suite versus just about anything else.
That's interesting. We actually cannot access Google at all. We actually don't even have Zoom. I'm on my personal computer right now. But we do have Mural and Miro we're looking into, and Microsoft Whiteboard, which is like our designers have Macs, but our enterprise partners have access to Microsoft Whiteboard, which we do not because we have Macs. So those are some of the tools that we're using at Fannie Mae.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, we're looking at all the tools for education as well, and you've mentioned them all: Google Sheets, Miro, Mural. I know both Mural and Miro offer educational discounts. So, like, I'm an instructor at SMU, so I get to use Miro with my students, and they don't charge myself or my students anything. Maybe they have a government sector version or maybe they should if they don't now. Smaply is also another tool that we've used with great success. So I know there are a lot out there, but I think you're on the right track, right? Use the lowest barrier to entry for the group that you're working with.
We've recently switched over to G Suites at Capital One, and Google offers up Jamboard, which is a really simple version of what Mural is, like extremely simple. But it's surprising you can adapt to a crude tool like that just to get the engagement with the team, and everyone can access it. There's no licenses, special if you're in Google's.
Do we have one more question? Maybe it's about, is the panel okay? You guys okay on time? Nobody's a hard stop? You good? Okay. So maybe one more question, two more questions, maybe.
Let's see. Yeah, we have a question here from Nick. So he says, keeping along the thread of the next 5 years, are you having success with driving the role or importance of design into non-customer facing departments of government? Are the successes from your work and initiatives highlighting the importance of design? Iran, do you want to run with that one?
I think digital services is doing a pretty great job, with they're building the front door to the city. And again, like this is a city that has traditionally been much more dominated by individual departments and has had much less of a strong kind of municipal and county identity. So, that work is so visible. And, once people experience like a nice modern interface, they don't want to go back. So, but that is very much customer facing. I don't think that we work with any departments that don't have those direct constituent interactions, actually. So I had to think about that one. There's very few, I would say there's very few people who don't interact with constituents one way or another. I mean, I get emails from constituents too, because I've been to enough meetings where they're like, "There's that person," and I think that most people who work for certainly the city and county of San Francisco actually have an ethic where they feel like they are customer facing in some sense.
Greg, you're on mute.
Thank you. I have one more question, if it's okay with you, and it's going to be a bit more tactical. I'm going to share my screen for a second. I'm going to start with you, Aza. What is your advice for someone who wants to start doing serious design for public works today? Are the skill sets slightly different? It's kind of like wraps up what we just discussed about being a bit more like cost conscious, for example, or more scrappy or more resourceful, right?
Yeah, I would say my one big tip for people wanting to work in this space would be for service designers that they have to know how to sell the value of what they're doing constantly, because in government it's so big and large and complex and so many people. You have to learn how to be an advocate for your work. I mean, you don't have to be, but you'll do a lot better if you are, because it's like selling across your peers, selling up, selling down. And it's just like you have to be able to articulate that. So communicating the value of what you're doing, even at the most rudimentary level, I think is just a huge skill to have, which may not be as prevalent in the private sector.
That's a great tip. Brian, do you have something similar to add?
Let me go. No, I would echo what Aza had said. In a lot of those roles right now in the public sector, right, you're going to have to advocate for the type of work that you're doing and show the return on not investment, but for lack of a better term, return on investment. Talking up the chain, down the chain. When you staff a project and you've got the traditional roles, and then you have some ancillary roles that some of the client executives may not be as familiar with, just because they're just not familiar with it. That's when you and your work and your impact on the project or the initiative overall really can pay off at the end of the day. You can really convert some of those folks that don't have any exposure to those types of processes or methodologies, now seeing the value of that. So being able to advocate your work product, being able to show the value add to the overall engagement, I would keep that on the forefront.
Iran?
Yeah, I still find service design to encompass such a breadth of skills. And so, that would probably shift in any environment. The activities that I'm seeing in my current situation that really add a lot of value are so much around navigating the organization, facilitating groups of people across hierarchies, really engaging with staff. The services we work on are really people intensive, and also it's almost every employee in the city and county is unionized, and so it is a different environment than I've experienced in the private sector. This certainly being part of a digital shop, the area where I feel like as a service designer, I'm really doing something different is really being out there and interacting with the organization and with staff more than a lot of my peers.
So they're all excellent tips. I appreciate. We're going to be doing something that is very unusual. We have been very fortunate to actually have one of our attendees being the head of Service Design Network out of Germany, Miss Megger. So I don't know if she can see us, but we're going to ask her, what does she think about this government public sector business?
Well, thanks for inviting me for a comment. I'm honored. First of all, my compliments to the Dallas chapter. I think it's amazing what you have set up here. Great panel, great panelists, and super interesting conversations. You might know that service design for the public sector is at my heart. Whenever I started working with service design, it was all around bringing service design to the public sector, making the quality of services that citizens receive and the relationship between government and citizens better and more equal. And I've seen an amazing development throughout these last 25 years. I think the conversation that we are having tonight is amazing. It is maybe a bit biased by the US point of view, of course. I mean, that's natural. I think if we were having this conversation in Germany, it would be much more about data protection. It would be a lot about hierarchy within these bureaucratic systems of government. It would be about culture of fear. Even though Germany seems to be so advanced and so modern, when you go into the public sector, you find that hierarchy and fear of taking responsibility and fear of speaking up is very predominant. And that makes the work of a service designer very difficult. I have learned that patience is important, respect for the culture that you are working with. You have to kind of stop your design mind of, running forward and pushing things and, wanting to change everything. You have to listen, you have to respect, you have to be patient, and you have to adapt partially in understanding for that culture that is driven by legal aspects, by concerns about, making mistakes. Everything has to be 150% proven. And changing that mentality is different. If you would have that conversation in China now, it would be much more about government control and lack of openness to criticism, because service design brings criticism into the system. You have to accept that people do not love what you're doing, and you have to embrace that in order to change. So I think when you work with government all over the world, you find comparable issues, but you also find differences. I would be happy to share with you the PDF of the impact report for service design in the public sector, which we did something like almost 4 years ago. So if you want to share it with the audience, I'm happy to send you the PDF.
That would be great. That'd be fantastic if you can. Yeah,
send it over in a couple of minutes. So, well, thanks for asking me. Thanks for doing all this. I'm like super impressed, and keep going.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry for putting you on the spot like this, but we figured, hey, she's here. We may as well use her knowledge and our expertise into this conversation. Thank you, very good. Iran, Aza, Brian, thank you so much for your time. This was great. As we discussed earlier, we have a lot more to discuss. So we probably have We're hoping in September, maybe in October, we have an event in September from Eric Wood, the CEO of Explain Portland, who's going to talk to us about something more tactical, more like pragmatic about how to actually activate service design through really cool visualization to actually help stakeholders understand what we're doing, which we discussed today. But we will also have a part 2 of what we discussed today, where we're going to have the 18F strategists and designers who will probably say very similar things, I'm guessing, from what the panel has been saying today, maybe different things. So we don't really know what their take is on being within the government and having this kind of like design mindset and how their job is different than you guys who work within each entity of the government. As always, thank you so much for the panel. You guys were great. If there's any follow-up questions from the attendees, we will send them to you. Again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Aza. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Birgit. I appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me.
You.
Great questions. Thank you for joining. See you next time.